Catherine's one of our integrative general practitioners, and she's been in practice for over 30 years. She's very experienced in integrative women's health, and she's got a particular interest in mind-body medicine. So I guess she's studied a variety of other healthcare disciplines, including kinesiology. She takes a holistic approach to healthcare, and she incorporates education and counselling, as well as natural and complementary therapies with conventional medicine. So if you'd like to join me in welcoming Catherine.
Okay, I read a book 30-something years ago when I was living in Kathmandu, and it's called The Road Less Travelled by M. Scott Peck. Some of you might be familiar with it. And I remember all these years later, the first line of the first paragraph said, "Life is difficult." And as Chris so eloquently said, he goes on to say, once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it's accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. So it is the resistance to the flow of life, as has been said, that is a large cause of our stress. And there would not be one person in this room who hasn't had some considerable stress in your life. And if anyone says they haven't, then I'll ask, were you born? Now, I'm going to be repeating, I'm afraid, some of what's been said, but you'll get the kindergarten version from me, and I'll try and go through it quickly. I do have a lot of slides. Stress is a rather big topic, and 20 minutes is not a lot of time. So I'll be going through it fairly quickly, and I'll be skipping through some, so I apologise ahead of time. So stress is actually a relatively recent term. It's been coined in relatively recent times. I wouldn't have heard my grandparents say they were stressed. I wouldn't have heard my parents say they were stressed. They might have said, oh, I had troubles, worries, but they wouldn't actually have used that terminology. But it's become common parlance, and we use it a lot. So what is stress? What do we mean by stress? It's when the demands upon a system, in our case our human system, are more than the system can cope with, or more than the system feels it can cope with. When we get too much of what we don't want and not enough of what we do want, which might be our best gift in retrospect, but it does cause us stress. And stress load means that we get too much physical, environmental, chemical, emotional and psychological stress, and it can be cumulative. And we tend to blame a lot on stress. Oh, it's stress, rather than looking at what underlies the stress reaction. And there are physical and there are psychological stresses, obviously. And physical stresses are anything that shifts the body away from homeostasis and threatens survival, and there are obviously many causes of that. This discussion is mainly on psychological stress because that is what we usually mean when we say, I am stressed. But the body is always involved because the body and mind always work together. Stress is a very somatic experience. And as has already been said, any treatment for stress has to involve the body. Under the umbrellas of stress can be trauma, PTSD, PTDS, I can't say it, anxiety, panic attacks, etc. That's out of the scope of my talk, but they're really different variations and gradations of the same theme. So the primal fears that underlie all our stresses are fear of annihilation, fear of abandonment and rejection, particularly when we're very young, because we are very relationally dependent beings, and fear of the unknown, chaos, change, even though that can be quite good for us. And we are still governed by these primal fears. So stress and fear are inextricably linked, and all stress taps into our fear of not surviving physically and maybe more particularly psychically, i.e. the ego. Bottom line. So why are we so stressed? Our modern day stresses, as I said, tap into our primal fears. Even if we're not greatly stressed, if we really home down into them, it will be tapping into one of those primal fears. And our societal dictates that suggest we need to look, be, do and have to a certain level to be accepted by our communities can tap into our deep primal fear of not being accepted by our tribe, being rejected by our tribe, which was a cause of death. Takes time. So many of us operate with ever-present stress and we don't even realise it. The pressures of life become such constant companions we don't know when we're tense and stressed very often. We consider it quite normal. So being caught in traffic can have us reacting physiologically as though we're running from a tiger. Because if I don't make that meeting, if I don't get to work on time, will I be a worthy investment? Will I get my survival needs met? We're not going through that mentally, but we are going through it subconsciously. Not everyone, of course. We all have our different predispositions to this. Now, the stresses that we're subject to are not always obvious, and I know this has already been mentioned. They're often subliminal and beyond our conscious awareness, but very much held in the body. And particularly, we can hold the stress of an unresolved stress or trauma unwittingly in our subconscious mind and thus our body for years. And these can have profound effects on our emotional and physical health and certainly on our well-being. Now, these subliminal subconscious stresses are potentially more of a problem, particularly regarding the effects on the body. Because when stress is apparent to us, even if it's devastating, we will be dealing with it one way or another. But when it's subconscious, we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes we have to reach deep to get to these subconscious levels. For example, perfectionism, as I well know. It's fine to do things well. Of course, we should encourage that, but for some of us, we somehow got the message, or we decided in relation to our early life experiences that we needed to maintain the bar up here at an often unreachable level to be acceptable. And to be acceptable at a primal level means to have our survival needs met. And this can be a deeply unconscious process that can cause significant ongoing tension for some of us. As I said, it's fine to do things well, but not if we're basing our self-worth and thus our worthiness on it. Now, they say in the animal world, but how do we really know, that the most potent stress has been trapped and immobilised. And there's a story of Pavlov's dogs, and it's not the story with the bowels and the saliva and the food, it's a different story that I heard from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk when he was in Melbourne last year. And these dogs apparently were kept in cages in the basement. And at one time there was a flood. And these dogs were trapped in their cages without food in icy water for 48 hours before they were reached. And they were extremely traumatised, and they were behaviourally never the same again. So trauma can change the brain. Now, luckily, we humans can rationalise our experiences a bit better. Makes you think of those boys in Thailand that were caught in the cave, and didn't they teach the world a thing or two about grace and presence under pressure? But being trapped or immobilised in the human world can equate to feeling disempowered or being stuck in a situation that is not for our benefit. And that can be a job, it can be a profession, it can be a paradigm. It could be being stuck in a personality that is not really who we are. Being disempowered can be bullying, and it can be oh so subtle. It can be stuck in any sort of life situation. And we're not always consciously aware of it. It's kind of in the background, but still causing significant stress. Now, Kylie's already mentioned this, and I'm going to give you the kindergarten version, but I'll go through this very quickly. So there are some key parts of the body that are very relevant regarding our stress reaction. So the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that regulates all the glands, organs and processes in the body that are not under conscious control. So we've got trillions of physiological and biochemical processes going on in any one moment, and that's largely regulated without any conscious awareness by the autonomic nervous system. It's pretty miraculous when you think about it. That's the intelligence of the body. So there are two main branches of the autonomic nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system that gears up the body for fight or flight, and there's the parasympathetic nervous system that calms the body down for rest, repair, regeneration and recovery. Don't worry too much about this diagram, but basically the nerve fibres start in the medulla, the brainstem, going down the spinal cord, out at various levels to innervate the glands and organs of the body. And they have a different function. For example, the sympathetic nervous system will cause the heart to beat faster, as happens when we're in fight or flight. The parasympathetic will calm it down. The sympathetic nervous system will dilate our pupils because we have to be very focused on the threat. The parasympathetic will cause constriction. And notably, the parasympathetic nervous system is very, very important for good gastrointestinal function. Now, there's a part of the brain called the limbic system, or the midbrain, or the emotional brain. And it's under the pink area, which is our cerebral cortices. And it's that bluey area. And there are some key players that are very relevant regarding our stress reaction. There's the hypothalamus, which is like the thermostat. So it helps keep the body regulated. There's the pituitary, which is like the conductor of all the glands in the bodies that put out hormones, including the adrenals. And the amygdala, which is the smoke alarm, it's the threat detector, very important in our stress reaction. And also related to our stress reaction, as I'm sure you know and has been mentioned, are the good old adrenal glands. So these are small glands that sit on top of the kidneys, small glands with an enormous function. We would not survive without them. And they put out a number of hormones, including the so-called stress hormones, namely adrenaline, noradrenaline, which puts us into fight or flight, brings about the physiological changes for fight or flight, and cortisol, which helps us cope with the stress when it has started and really helps mop up the aftermath to put us back in homeostasis. That's the adrenal glands in cross-section. Now, the stress response system, and I know it's already been mentioned, is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So the amygdala in the midbrain, the limbic brain, gets the message that there's a threat, and that can be internal, external. We'll send a message to the hypothalamus, which will send a message to the pituitary, which will send a message to the adrenal glands to put out the stress hormones. And then if the stress abates, there'll be a feedback loop back to the limbic brain to say slow it all down. So we want that to work. That keeps us on the planet. But too much of this is not a good thing, and there are a lot of metabolic deleterious effects that can occur if the stress response goes on and on and on. And we know that elevated cortisol, absolutely essential in the short term. We would not survive without cortisol, but too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And we know that too much cortisol for too long can cause blood sugar imbalances, immune system suppression, gut dysfunction, constricts the blood vessels, contributes to hypertension, loss of bone density, and on it goes. So trauma or chronic stress can cause dysregulation of this whole system. And it can cause a hypervigilant sympathetic nervous system, which puts us in fight or flight. Sometimes, more rarely, people can be parasympathetic nervous system dominant. So you might notice when people are stressed, some people, they get busy and active, okay? They use up a lot of energy. That's when they're more sympathetic dominant, or they can slow down and conserve energy and withdraw. And more the freeze response, that's when they're parasympathetic dominant. And our constitutional types depend on a whole host of factors, including our environment, our learned behaviour, and particularly our ancestral influences, which have a much more potent effect on us than we think. If our ancestors survived by running away from the enemy, more likely we're going to go into flight. If they hid, more likely we're going to go into freeze. It's not as straightforward as that. And our constitutional types can change throughout our life. But usually sympathetic dominance is more of a problem in our communities because it's encouraged by our society. Don't just sit there, go and do something. We live in a very achievement-orientated society, so people are more prone to be sympathetic dominant. And when we are, the sympathetic nervous system is overworking, the parasympathetic is underworking. It is like running from a tiger 24/7. There's excess production of the stress hormones and all the metabolic ill effects from that. It's a catabolic energy expending state, and it's agitating psychologically and physically, and it uses up resources. And with that, there can be constant tension and that tired but wired feeling. And this is not an uncommon thing, and some people consider it normal. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a great little book on this called SD Protocols by Dr. Wayne Todd, who's a chiropractor. He explains this beautifully and gives some wonderful tips as to how to manage it. So when we're in sympathetic dominance, it is like we're reacting like we're running from a tiger 24/7. And when we're running from a tiger 24/7, we're going to be very selective regarding where we send our resources, and they're going to be going to the fight or flight mechanism, or the freeze sometimes. And then there will be less resources available for other functions of the body that are considered less important if there's an emergency. And that's digestion and reproduction. So if we're running from a tiger, digestion can wait. and it's not necessarily a good time to make a baby. Now, sometimes it is, but not necessarily. Now, pretty much everyone with chronic stress that I've seen who are in sympathetic dominance have gastrointestinal issues. And yes, we know that changing diet and the old gut detox and all that can be immensely helpful, and it can. But unless this is addressed, that will only go so far. So ideally, we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic imbalance. So Kylie probably knows more about this, but the yin state's the healing state, and that's when the parasympathetic nervous system gets a decent look in. If we're in sympathetic overdrive for long enough, as I said, it uses up a lot of resources, it's catabolic, and it's a very static state where nothing changes. And people, it's very hard to heal when we're in sympathetic dominance. So we need the parasympathetic nervous system to have a look in to bring about rest, repair, recovery. And a lot of things we suggest for stress management are at that aim. Now, I'm going to briefly mention, because it's a talk on stress, Hans Selye's 3 famous phases of stress. Have you heard of him? Okay. So really the term stress became popular on the heels of his work, which is early last century. And he talked about 3 phases of stress: the acute phase, the adaptation phase, and the exhaustion phase. And I think they're very real. So the acute phase is the alarm phase. We have an acute stress. We're walking across the road, a car comes careering around the corner. We want this to work so we can quickly get out of the way. So this is a life-saving mechanism. But usually the stress will go, we recover, no problem. The adaptation phase is when we adapt to what we consider to be sustained stress that we can't change. It might be being stuck in a job or a life situation that is given us kind of manageable but ongoing stress. And we don't feel we can control it or change it, so we bunker down, so to speak. And the body prepares as though we are either going through a long cold winter or a famine or a long battle, because we still react like those past times when they were our major threats. Our physiology hasn't caught up with our societal environmental changes. And there are a lot of metabolic changes, such as elevation of cholesterol, etc., at this phase. And a lot of people live their life like that. Now, when we're in this phase, and when we think we can't change anything, there is a preponderance for the mind to think, ruminate, rather than act. Now, the exhaustion phase, if that's been going on for too long, we feel we can no longer cope with stress and throw in the towel, so to speak. So the mind-body has given up the fight. The body goes into degeneration as the mind goes into depression and apathy. And cortisol is low at this stage, and it's a very low energy state, and a lot of the body's processes like thyroid function, adrenal function slow down. And this is the realm of adrenal exhaustion, some of the, maybe all of the, chronic fatigue syndromes. And underlying this, there can be a deep subconscious imperative to withdraw from the pressures of life. It's like too much, too long. What can I do? I have to withdraw. Now, all these phases are recoverable, most definitely, given the right circumstances and support. But definitely the last phase does take a lot more work to turn it around. Now, stress is inflammatory, and as has already been said, inflammation is a robust and reliable predictor of all-cause morbidity in adults. And there are many physical contributors, but there are also a number of emotional contributors. So inflammation in the short term, absolutely vital. If we're fighting a toxin, virus, bacterium, we need this. We're having inflammatory processes going on all the time in our body. So in the short term, no problem. Chronically, yes, major problem. Now, studies have shown that psychosocial stress, and this might have been mentioned already, can directly provoke pro-inflammatory cytokine production. So they're the chemicals that cause the inflammatory reaction in the absence of infection or injury. So psychosocial stress alone can cause these inflammatory mediators to circulate. And these inflammatory mediators, the prostaglandins and the cytokines, they're designed to slow us down, to withdraw from our usual engagement in life and to socially withdraw, because we normally have them in response to an infection. And it's nature's way of saying, don't go out and spread the infection. Stay inside, recover, heal. And that's fine. If we get a flu, we have no choice, basically. So in the short term, fine. But a lot of the chronic fatigue syndromes are like a prolonged flu. People have the same symptoms. They have the brain fog. They have the pain, which is inflammatory. They're lethargic, and they're very often depressed. Pro-inflammatory cytokines make us feel depressed. You know that feeling when you get the flu. Now, from a mind-body perspective, inflammation means defence. It's part of our defence mechanism. And it can be related to that ruminating, overthinking, rather than acting. And our propensity to experience this is often related to prior, often childhood trauma stress, where one did not feel safe and easily goes into that defensive state. Now, I'm going to give you a mini lesson on brainwaves. I hope I have time, but it is relevant to what I'm about to say. So brain waves are related to our conscious state, and they're measured in frequency, in hertz. So beta brain waves are our normal waking state. We're engaged in life. Stress is high beta. Alpha is when we're awake, we're alert, but we're quite relaxed, like reading a book, listening to music, watching a non-violent movie. It's a very healing state. Delta, the slower waves, are when it's that hypnagogic state between sleep and wake. And a lot of meditators aim for that level because it's quite a healing state. And theta is usually when we're in deep sleep, a very healing state. Some meditators can go into theta. Gamma it's actually very, very high frequency, but extraordinarily coherent. Very, very healing. It's peak performance, and it's where meditators can break through the veil, so to speak. But the relevance of this discussion is that children between the ages 0 and 6 or 7, they're mainly in delta or theta brainwaves. So they're like in a hypnagogic state or all of the time. And they're very, very programmable. We're all programmable. They're particularly programmable. So in the first 7 years, they observe and download. They get encultured. And they say, we don't know who we are until we're told who we are. And this is why our early life experiences have such a potent impact on our later predisposition to stress, or can have. Now, taking you back to the limbic system, that part of the brain that's under the cerebral cortices, that is so involved in our stress reaction. It's also called the emotional brain, the midbrain. So, as I said before, it's very aligned with the autonomic nervous system, and thus with their body's autonomic physiological processes, which are controlled by regulated by the autonomic nervous system. It's where the nervous and endocrine systems come together. It's aligned with our subconscious mind, which is said to be about 95% of our mind. It's literally under the cortices, which is the seat of our conscious mind. And it's where mind and body come together. And it's where the mind chemically conditions the body. Now, there's a term called limbic imprinting. And much of our stress reactions as adults stem from our limbic imprinting, which is formed in very early life, particularly the first years of life, and some would say in utero. And as I said, we're like sponges. We just take our experiences in directly without any intellect to run them by. And this has already been stated, but from our limbic imprinting, it becomes our filter, our perceptive lens. It determines how we view ourselves, other people, and life in general. And generally speaking, we're going to view life as safe if we had all our nutrients needs met, or we're going to view it as dangerous. And our physiology will respond in the same way. And if we view the life as dangerous, we are going to be in a more defensive state and more easily go into the stress response. So yes, adults, we're all going to get stressed. The adult can actually handle any stress. The wounded inner child cannot. So our childhood background, and this is not to blame anyone, it's just how it is, and particularly the relationship with the early caregivers, has a huge role to play in our predisposition to stress. So unresolved trauma can put the mind-body in a hypervigilant state where the stress reaction can become like a hair trigger. There are studies that look into that. I won't go into it. Now, I'm going to quote Bruce Lipton here. Some of you might have heard of him. He's a molecular biologist, cell biologist. He's written a number of books. And this is from a lecture he gave in Melbourne in 2014. So he says the subconscious mind is about 95%, and that's associated with those deeper limbic areas of the brain where we hold our programs and patterns. And our conscious mind, more associated with our cerebral cortices, is about 5%. And that's our executive functioning. And he says we default to our subconscious programming when the conscious mind is not paying attention, i.e. when we're stressed. He also says that's when we become like our parents, which is a good thought for some, but maybe not for some others. Now I'm going to skip over that. So I'm going to take you back to this picture, and the pink mushy area, that's our cerebral cortices, and particularly the frontal cortex. It's the seat of our conscious awareness. It's the seat of our will, purposefulness, intention. It's where we have awareness of self. And there's a sliver of brain called the medial prefrontal cortex that can get to the limbic brain. So this is what we exercise when we meditate, when we contemplate, when we review our life. And it's almost like the prefrontal cortex is the adult. The limbic system can be the wounded child that's freaking out. And a good therapist is the frontal lobe for someone else who's very stuck in that stress loop where the limbic system is taken over. So what's the purpose of stress? It's to get our attention. So stress is highly adaptive in the short term. It does keep us on the planet, but can have detrimental effects in the long term, as we know. I personally don't believe that stress per se causes serious illness. We know it can cause wear and tear and certainly discomfort. It's more what underlies the stress that's unresolved that can be the issue, and how we manage the stress. And studies have actually demonstrated that adverse effects on health from stress, particularly when we believe that stress is bad for health. We know it's not good, but it's not as simple as stress causes disease, in my understanding. And remember, we're very resilient. So don't shoot the messenger. We want that stress reaction to work. It does keep us on the planet. And the stress symptoms, they will alert us to something needing to be addressed of it in our bodies, in our environment, in our thoughts, whatever. I would be much more concerned if people actually don't get stress symptoms when something awry is going on in their bodies or their life, because they don't know what they don't know. And putting a veneer over the stress is certainly not the answer. And we know that a little bit of stress is immensely beneficial. We would actually vegetate if we didn't have some stress. We would. We wouldn't evolve as a species. And as I say, our greatest growth is when we're out of our comfort zone, and that's very, very true. We stress muscle to make it stronger. So it's not about eliminating all stress in your life. It's about tolerating some and managing it. And sometimes stress is just burnout. If there's nothing unresolved from the past, sometimes it's just people doing too much too intensely for too long, and they need a holiday or some fun to recalibrate. And they recover very quickly if it's as simple as that. But stress is a concern if one is overwhelmed by it, if it's causing significant ongoing physical and psychological impairment, and if it's preventing one from engaging and doing what they want to do in life particularly. It's when we cannot turn off the stress response that it's a problem. So there are many things we can do to help soothe the stress response, not suppress it, but soothe it. Now remember, our stress reactions are very, very tenacious, particularly when they've been present from childhood. It's the body trying to keep us safe, and the body does not want to give this up quickly. So we have to, as I said, it's a matter of living with them and manage them sometimes. So what can we do? So to treat or heal anything, we need to work from the outside in and the inside out. We need to take care of the details while also maintaining a bigger picture overview of our experiences and our health challenges. Now, some of this might be but obviously removing the stressor. If someone is in a toxic environment, a toxic relationship, they're working 18 hours a day, clearly that has to be changed. We can't always change our life circumstances, nor should we, but sometimes we need to. Appropriate psychological therapy is immensely important, particularly if there's something unresolved from the past. If someone's in the stress loop, they don't have clarity, they do not see possibilities that they might otherwise. So NIIM has very good psychiatrists and psychologists that can be very helpful, and this is very, very important for a lot of people. As has been mentioned, debriefing with trusted friends. We all need someone to bear witness to our difficult experiences. It's a human need. We need to actually vocalise our experiences. And I think Kylie mentioned a study where that has shown to be very beneficial in breast cancer. To a point though, we don't want to be going over the story again and again and again, but initially it's actually quite important to debrief. I won't have time to go into this in detail, but if someone is nutrient deficient, it will make them much, much more prone to stress. So there are things that can be immensely helpful. It's already been mentioned. I'll just run through this. You need to discuss this with your own healthcare practitioner, but even things like magnesium, zinc, immensely helpful. B vitamins, the methyl Bs, vitamin C, antioxidants, essential fatty acids, and on it goes. And there are some very, very, very good herbs that can help soothe the stress response. Healthy eating habits, I think we've talked about that. That's not just food choices, that's actually eating slowly, chewing well in a non-stressful environment. Our culture doesn't encourage that. It encourages the sandwich while we're doing paperwork at the desk at lunchtime. But for good digestion, we need this. It tells the parasympathetic nervous system that everything's okay. Avoid hypoglycemia, major stress for some people. It can stimulate the adrenals. So some people need to eat 6 small meals or at least a decent snack between meals. Obviously the leafy greens, the antioxidants. Exercise has been mentioned, very stress relieving. I'm not suggesting you get up at 5 a.m. to do boot camp though. That can be physiologically quite devastating. It might be fun for some people, but as Carly mentioned, Tai Chi and yoga, many studies have shown the benefits of those disciplines, highly to be encouraged. The body has to get involved. We can't just deal with the mind. Adequate sleep, yes, when we're acutely stressed, we often don't sleep well. That's okay for a short time, but utilising those sleep hygiene habits are very important. Melatonin is one of our most potent anti-inflammatories. Nature, we overlook the simple things. Get outside, go for a walk in the sunshine. Have a day where you spend it in nature. I lose my balance very quickly if I don't have a day where I'm walking in nature. We're over-confined. Grounding techniques, literally feet on the ground. Breathe. Sympathetic nervous system, shallow upper breath, chest breathing. Parasympathetic, deep diaphragmatic breathing. So if we do that, it's telling the brain everything's okay. Posture, Wayne Todd in his book talks a lot about that, some really useful, doable advice. Progressive muscle relaxation lets the brain know the difference between being tense and being relaxed. We're designed to shake off stress hormones like animals do. We don't like to do it in public, it doesn't look great, but it's actually very beneficial, it really is. If I'm stressed and I'm maybe not in public, I'll let myself shake and I usually feel better afterwards. Regular breaks and unstructured time to let the parasympathetic nervous system get a look in. Now, if you're busy, it can be 10 minutes. It can be sitting having a cup of tea in a cafe, flicking through a magazine, put those phones away. Don't look at your phones during that time. Music changes the brain waves. Singing quiet changes the brain waves. Great for coherence. Laughter, the best stress reliever. We take ourselves way too seriously. That's part of the problem. Having something to look forward to. An activity or hobby, I paint. I paint because I love painting, but also it's a therapy for me because I'm focused on the task. I get myself out of the way. It feels very good. So we get more into that creation rather than survival mode. Now, I think it helps to have a philosophical overview, a bigger picture, put some meaning on our experiences. It helps us navigate through stress. And it can be as simple as, well, this really sucks, but look what I'm learning from it, because there will always be something, and we learn the most actually from experiences we might not choose. Defining your values and purpose, following your own North Star, it will help guide you, as has already been mentioned, through, the stresses of life. Meditation is to change the brainwaves, but also exercise the frontal lobe, the observer self. And as Hans Sally said, the pituitary is a much better judge of stress than the intellect. I would totally agree. The body knows before the mind does, and we would be very well advised to tune in. I'll end now. This is young Tazo. Well, Tazo's actually in cat heaven now, but I had the pleasure of his company for about 20 years, and he was a very chilled boy. And once someone accidentally vacuumed his tail. So, not off, he's fine, he's good, no animals were hurt. So he would go into that stress response when he saw a vacuum cleaner. Very much. That amygdala would say enemy, you know, the pupils would dilate and all that. But he'd be like this most of the time. So animals can teach us a lot. Thank you.